And I'm Megan.
And today we're going to inform you a little bit about mass vaccinations for smallpox. Mass vaccinations have become a pretty heated issue in the past few years. Some people believe that mass vaccinations should be required in the United States to prevent an epidemic and to prevent any sort of virus being used as biological warfare, because the idea is sort of if everybody in the United States has been vaccinated, then what could we be harmed with? And it sounds kind of scary at first, and the idea of mass vaccinations might sound like a good idea at first glance, but in the next few minutes, Megan and I are going to explain why it's really not such a good idea and why these fears just really don't have that much truth to them.
Okay, so just for some background information, we would like everyone to be on the same page concerning what smallpox is and a little bit about the history of the disease. In this picture, you can see the development of smallpox and what it looks like at various stages from day 3 to day 13 of the disease. Smallpox is caused by a virus known as variola, the Latin word meaning spotted virus. It is a contagious disease characterized by small pus-filled blisters on the face and body, and it can be transmitted through immediate contact with an infected person. It actually has an incubation period of about 1 to 2 weeks, so you might not even know that you're initially infected. In this first picture, you can see that you just have a really small, tiny blister on the skin, and as it develops, as far as the next day and even into the 5th day, your blisters get bigger and they become more infected, and by day 13, you're not looking so good.
Just a little bit of the history of smallpox. Smallpox is thought to have originated in about 1000 BC in either Egypt or India. And in 1798, the first vaccine for smallpox was developed using a live virus. And because it contains a live virus, the vaccine is actually administered differently than how you would normally think of most vaccinations. Because when we think of vaccinations, we normally think of just standard needle at a doctor's office or at the pharmacy. But the smallpox vaccine was actually vaccinated using a 2-pronged needle that was dipped in a live solution. And then it would puncture the skin on the upper arm multiple times. And sorry. We had a picture that showed what the injection site looked like, but basically when you get injected, because it was a live virus, you would actually develop one of the bumps from the smallpox, and it looked really gross, but it was how you knew that it was actually working. And it would progressively get worse for about 2 weeks after the vaccine, and then it would sort of scab over. And actually, people who have had the smallpox vaccine in the past, my mom got the smallpox vaccine, and she still has a scar from it on her arm, so it really wasn't a very pretty sight after you got the vaccine.
Alright, after the vaccine was developed, many people received it in the United States. In 1949, this marked the last documented case of smallpox in the United States. And over 20 years later, the World Health Organization launched an initiative to end smallpox. In 1972, mass vaccination was held in the United States, and 5 years after this was the last naturally occurring case in the world.
So even though there hasn't been a naturally occurring case of smallpox in over 35 years, some people still believe that the United States should require mass vaccinations. And the reason why is a naturally occurring epidemic really isn't that much of a fear, but biological weapons, people are really scared about smallpox being used as a biological weapon by terrorists. In the next few slides, though, Megan and I are going to debunk a few of these fears.
In the 1700s and 1800s, there was a smallpox epidemic in North America. An epidemic is defined in Webster Dictionary as something spreading rapidly by infection, affecting many individuals or a population in an area at the same time.
But in reality, There hasn't been a case of smallpox in the United States since 1949. The last known case anywhere occurred in 1977. And since then, we've become a lot better about knowing things about contagion and how to prevent diseases from spreading. And so it's been shown that ring-type vaccinations are actually just as effective as mass vaccinations, but they're even safer. And a ring vaccination is when only a small target population receives the vaccine. A few common examples of this would be how school children are required to get immunizations before going into school, and doctors, nurses, people who work around these kinds of diseases all the time, they'd be at higher risk. They get the shot instead of giving it to everyone, young and old, no matter what your occupation is.
Okay, well, there was information on this slide. We're going to talk about biological warfare. Biological warfare is defined as any biological weapon, per se, used to affect and even kill humans, plants, and animals. The last case of biological weapon being used was in 2001 with anthrax, right before the Iraq War. In this case, anthrax was shipped in the mail, and it was used in a white powder. And this was fearful for the United States because there was no way to really combat this for a time. Smallpox does not show the same risk because anthrax was spread through the air, so it was easily, people were easily contaminated or exposed to this contagion. Smallpox, on the other hand, is spread by direct contact with infected people or bodily fluids and does not show nearly as high of a risk. Also, the United States required mass vaccinations. They cannot be positive that the vaccination would affect the direct strain that would be presented to the citizens. And this is also a low risk because there are only 2 samples of smallpox left in the world. After it was completely eradicated, there's only samples left in the United States and also 1 sample left in the lab in Russia. And another reason why people are fearful is because according to an article in Yale Medical, that there's speculation that the Russian scientists are becoming desperate and working for anyone who will pay them. And in this case, they fear that they will use the smallpox virus as a biological weapon, but this is only speculation. Economic stress. There was also slides and information on these. Just so you know, there are a couple of factors that go into making the vaccination, not just the initial vaccination itself, but cost would also be needed to train personnel, make sure that the the vaccination was administered correctly. There would be cost into testing the vaccination before it was administered to humans to make sure that it is safe. Cost needed to control waste management afterwards to ensure that the vaccination does not affect anyone in a harmful way. Cold storage and transportation, considering that we need to make sure that the virus does not alter itself in any way, shape, or form. And then alterations due to any changes in the strain or any developments in the smallpox virus. We also had initially a table that displayed more of the information and an equation going into the general cost and a general vaccination that is presented to the public. This was from the World Health Organization, and in this they displayed that there were variables affecting how much it would cost. Typically, vaccinations would be administered to infants, new vaccinations in general, and they would require up to 3 a year. It did not take into account that since it would be a vaccination that not everyone is exposed to, that many adults would also need to have the vaccination administered to them. And the initial cost for the first year, without the adults being factored in, amounted to about $18,450,000. and for preceding years it would amount to about $14,750,000. And this is a considerable amount of money being used, considering that the risk may or may not be there.
Every competent adult has the right to refuse medical treatment. There have been multiple court cases that have upheld this decision, even if the treatment provided could have been life-saving. If a person says that for whatever reason they absolutely do not want this medical treatment, it can't be forced upon them. One example is Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't believe in blood transfusions, a lot of them don't, and there have been a couple of cases where a blood transfusion could have saved someone's life, but because of their religious background, they refuse. And I couldn't find any hard data saying that a Jehovah's Witness or someone of a similar religion would refuse a vaccination for smallpox, but just making an educated guess, I could see problems down the road from a live virus being injected. I could see them saying, I don't want a live virus inside of my body because my religion doesn't believe in that. And we had an actual quote on here that said that all competent adults have the right to refuse medical treatment, except for when the interest of the state is greater than the individual's rights. And that's a good idea, but when it comes down to how slim the risk of a smallpox epidemic really is, the individual really should come first, especially when you look at all of the side effects. And there are a lot of side effects. Some of them include blindness, confusion, sores on the mouth. There's just a long list of common side effects that can happen in anyone. And so the fact that you would force every citizen to receive a vaccination that has this many side effects just seems completely unethical, especially when the golden rule in medicine is to first do no harm. And you can see that with all of the side effects that come from this vaccination, there would be harm. This is just a small portion of effects that could affect everyone, but certain demographics are actually at very high risk for even high mortality rates. And these include young people, the elderly, and people with immunodeficiency diseases. Statistics show that it is estimated that 5 out of every 2 million people vaccinated would die from the smallpox vaccine. 5 out of every 1 million infants would die. And even though 5 out of a million doesn't really seem like a lot, I doubt that if a parent had the choice when the risk of something actually happening was so slim, they wouldn't want to take that risk, the risk of death, when the risk of something happening without the vaccination really isn't even there. It's also estimated that about 60% of youth infected with HIV don't know that they have the disease. And if you have an immunodeficiency disease like that, and you're injected with a live virus, there could be a lot of problems. There's no way that somebody's immune system could handle the live virus. And then just to use a quote from Miller and Levine, the handout that we had gotten in lab, any number of deaths is too many when the risk of infection is only hypothetical. Vaccinations are good. Vaccinations save lives. And we need vaccinations, like ring vaccinations for children going to school. And it's a good idea to offer the option for other vaccinations, such as the flu vaccination, to the general public. But when you look at all of the economic, medical, and social issues associated with mass vaccinations, the costs just far outweigh the potential benefits of potentially saving someone from a risk that might not even be there. Thank you.